go back in time again, January 1977. And I guess you've kind of noticed on all these back in times, I have these little things to remind me which page to go to, and there's only one in this one. And what I've learned about myself doing this is that I'm still kind of in the same place mentally that I was back then. I was really separating articles that were mostly theory from articles that were reality, and there weren't many articles that were reality in the early days. They were mostly theory. They were written by writers who were doing the best they could, but they weren't spending a ton of time on the lakes. They were a lot of times fishing with a local guy and having to trust what he was telling them was real, and most of it was not. They were working on theory themselves. And also at this time frame, we had a lot of opponents to bass fishing taking place, and one of our biggest actually were outdoor writers, and especially the newspaper outdoor writers. But even those in the bigger magazines back then were Sports Afield, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream. They saw us as a threat, and I don't know if they saw it accurately at first, but we were based on one thing, professional jealousy, that we were providing already in our young infancy age of fishing, a lot more factual reality than they were. And in fairness to them, they didn't spend tons of time on the water. It was a job. They cover, like an outdoor writer, they cover fishing, they cover duck hunting, they cover dove hunting, they cover deer hunting, saltwater fishing, all kinds of fishing. So they weren't specializing in one species like we were. And anyway, but I did have one little one in here I found interesting. I just found fun. Here's a picture of 3 guys in a boat fishing with their son. And I don't know the guy in the front, but the one in the back is Doc Moorhead, whose son was Dan Moorhead. Well, can you guess who that is holding up his first big bass? It was Dan Moorhead.
I doubt that was his first.
And first big bass, that's what I said, okay. But anyway, so some of you that know Dan and maybe knew Doc even will find that kind of amusing, fun. But that's all I really have in the January 1977, because most of it to me was not giving me what I wanted most. I wanted to know reality. I wanted to learn truly what was happening. So we will move on to February 1977. And that's me, my first BassMaster Classic.
First cover.
First cover on any magazine in the outdoors that I know of. And again, this is 1977. The classics back were held in the falls, and the classic here at Guntersville was 1976 that I won. But BassMaster was a little delayed in getting reports on their tournament circuits in their magazines, usually 3 to 4 months delayed. And so this was, again, February 1977, and I'd won the classic at Lake Guntersville in October 1976, just to keep us updated on the same time frame. That was these two, the 2 biggest fish I caught the second day going out. I was in like 3rd place, Bo Dowden was leading, and I had kind of a little bit of a frustrating first day. I had lost some fish. This was 10 fish limit, I only brought in 7 that day. And so the next day, but my last fish that day, I was coming out of Browns Creek. I was fishing in the very back of it because all the classics before then had won in the backs of one of the bigger creeks. And that was the pattern I was working with. Was going, pick the bigger creeks on the lake, even though I'd never fished Guntersville, go in the very backs of them and figure out what the fish were doing. And I really kind of got on them pretty strong in the backs. But also, I was a hydrilla fisherman back then. I grew up in East Texas where there was a lot of hydrilla. I knew how to fish it. I knew how many fish it held. Also knew that it usually held the biggest fish. And I'd been fishing some hydrilla in practice, but I really hadn't caught anything. But they were coming out that evening to the first day of the tournament. There was just out on the river, main lake side of Browns Creek Bridge, was an isolated bed of the hydrilla. It wasn't much bigger around than your house, probably. And I caught one about 3.5, 4 pounds that gave me my 7th fish that last day, and helped me move it to stay in third. So I know where I was starting the next morning. It's where I caught that good one. And of course, of all things, there was a giant storm hitting us that morning, a front coming through. I mean, you could look to the northwest, and it was, one of those black walls coming at you with lightning popping out of it. And of course, again, I think back on it now that we would never be allowed to go out now in those conditions. Well, Ray, this was his baby, and we were going to fish no matter what. And he used a negative word and said, get it out of here, get the plank out of here right now. And so we all took off. And I took off running directly into the storm. And instead of, a lot of guys were going upriver, I was going toward the dam. And I got to that weed bed, and my first strike, I was throwing a big spinnerbait with big Indiana blades, burning it, where I was leaving a wake on the top and burn it. And my first fish that hit me looked like a wash tub, that big, sucked my bait in. And it was the biggest one here, 7.15. The next one was 6.4. The next one was 6.2. I had made just about one complete round, and the last one was a 4.8. And I already had, over 20 pounds. And I went, wow, and this is another strange thing about this event. Ray Scott had got one of his bright promoting deals, and he put CBs in all the boats. So the outdoor rider could report on this CB, boat number so-and-so has caught 1 little pounder, blah, blah. So you heard that going on all day, which I did not like myself. Boat 25, I was boat number 1. I didn't know that until I reread this. And then so that morning, my rider called in, boat number 1 has 4 fish, it'll weigh 20 blah, blah, blah pounds. And of course, I remember after the tournament was over that night, it wasn't over, but after that day was over, Bo Down come up to me. I was never so mad when I heard that report. I was just picking up my rod to make my first cast, and you already had over 20 pounds. He said, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Yeah, but anyway, so, and I didn't get another bite. I didn't get another bite. I went around that weed bed probably 2 or 3 more times and never got another bite. And so then I ran back to my little fish up in the back of Browns Creek. So that was these 2 incredible fish that day, beautiful, healthy fish. And that, I ended up catching a limit. All my other fish came on a Bagley honeybee, this right here, in the back of the creek. And I'd never fished one before until the practice here. A friend of mine named Denver Waltham in Houston and Mertis Driscoll had a fishing show in Houston. And somehow I saw Denver right before I left to go to New Orleans to catch the airplane to Guntersville. And he said, hey, take some of these baits with you. You need to try them. You really need to try them. He knew how much I like crankbaits. And so it was a Bagley honeybee. And it was just a little tiny bait, and I was fishing it around the stumps. In practice, I went in the second biggest creek. So like I said, I'd read all the Bassmaster Classics before that, and they'd all been won on man-made impoundments back in the very backs of the big creeks in October. So that's what I was looking for that pattern. And I went through a beautiful back of a creek with stumps all along the creek, a real shallow water, 3 to 6 foot deep. And I was throwing a spinnerbait, my favorite bait, especially back then, and never had a bite. And on the way, right before I got to the back, I met a local boat coming out. And we're not supposed to get any information, but of course they saw the classic boat and they have to, oh man, you should have been here yesterday. Man, we killing them in here yesterday. And they were throwing spinnerbaits. So I tied on that Bagley honeybee, and after they went by and went out, I turned and went by, and every other stump I caught a fish off from with that little, I'd reel that, throw it by a stump, reel it down beside it and stop it. When I stopped it, whap, I went ahead. And then my confidence went through the roof. So that's the second day of the tournament. I went back to that because that's what I did the first day. And I kept losing too many fish. And I'll tell you why I lost them. I figured that out the final day when I almost lost my Bassmaster Classic, but I figured it out, why I was losing them. Excuse me. So when the tournament started that second day, after catching those 4 big ones, I ran back in there, and I was working stumps, and I was working a little tiny riprap bridge in the very back, and ended up catching my other 7 keepers, and I come in and I take the lead. I had over 30 pounds, 30-something pounds. That was a 10-fish limit, and I took the lead. And so the next day, I mean, I'm pumped, and I can't sleep. I mean, of course, I can't emphasize enough how important this tournament was. I mean, I was, like I told you, y'all heard the story before, I had to hawk my deer rifle to get to New Orleans. I didn't have the money to drive from even Houston, Texas to New Orleans. So, so that was how financially important this event was. And I knew the Classic would turn everything around quicker than any other thing I could possibly do. And so I knew how important this third day was going to be. And I ran out there, started on the weed bed, and nothing. But see, the day before, and we all know now that when that bad weather was coming, the big ones are going to bite. And that's when I caught them. Afterwards, after the fun had passed, we usually know that bite's going to go away. Sometimes not completely, sometimes completely. So I went around it like 4 or 5 times, never had a bite, burning that big Indiana spinnerbait. And so I ran, so I got to go back, I just got to go back. And I ran back into my little bridge back there. Then I caught most of them on the second day. And it was real shallow. It's probably only like 4 or 5 foot gill going to the bridge. But underneath the bridge, which is typical, there was a 8 to 9 foot hole. And then it came, when you went under the bridge to the back of the cove, it got even shallower, like 2 foot deep. And these fish were on the edges of the corners and around that 8 foot hole. And I'd throw it up there, and the way I was catching them was the same way I was catching them off the stumps. I'd throw the crankbait up, come down the riprap, stop it. Come down the riprap, stop it. And when I was stopping it, I could feel the tick. And I'd set the hook. And that first day, I swear, the first 4 fish that hit me, I'd set the hook, move them about 6 foot, and they'd come off. And I'm going, I'm blowing it. I'm blowing it. You know, I'm just going, I'm blowing it. And then, of course, this is an overused statement nowadays, but the thought of Einstein came through my mind. Don't continue to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. And so I really sat there and thought, okay, next cast, I throw it down there, and I was stopping it every time on a tight line. So when I'd stop it, I would push my rod tip toward the bait, which created a little bit of slack. And then I'd just feel my line jump, and I'd set the hook, and every one of them had it down the rest of the day in their gut. And here's what almost cost me the tournament. I'm going to skip all the way back to here, maybe. Got to find it. I don't think that, maybe I'm holding in a picture, but I don't think it is. Probably in the next one. So anyway, this is probably, but before we left Houston, first time I'd ever heard of a graphite rod. Skyline graphite rod sent ever angler 6 brand new Skyline rods. I'd never had a rod that good. I was so thrilled, even though I hadn't even gone to the Classic yet, I got 6 brand new, beautiful rods. And then that's finally when I figured out, and they were graphite, which were super sensitive. And what you got to remember about graphite is it does allow you to feel the strike better. And if you're in the degree of angler you are, that increases. Okay, and believe me, Rick Clunn was as pumped as you could possibly believe, sensory-wise. I mean, I'm feeling, I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm tasting, I'm smelling everything. And when I would stop that crankbait by those stumps or by that riprap, and I'd keep the line tight, I felt it when they opened their mouth and started to suck in. I was feeling it, and I was reacting way too fast. And then all my rods before them were old glass rods, and most of them had new eyes put on them, tips broken off. I didn't have that kind of feel with my old rods. I was experiencing a sensitivity of a rod that I'd never experienced. And if I had not figured out, to give it slack, so when they sucked it in, I didn't feel it as quick. Plus, it was further in their mouth when I did set the hook. I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. It's just that little tiny detail allowed me to catch my 10 fish limit, come in and win the Bassmaster Classic. So it's just, it even amazes me now when I talk about it, how so many little details and how athletes at any level, how they experience it at such a different level than ever experienced it before. Here's my trophy. My trophy, the first classic trophy, and my first wife, Jerry. But still, it was in the most angry I ever got. I'm a typical husband. I'm just a man. I'm not something. The most angry I ever got was that night after I'd won the Classic. I think everything in me that I'd been experiencing, had been kept inside, decided to come out. So it was.
And what did you do? I know this story.
Well, me and Jerry, who deserved it less than anybody on the face of the planet, caught the brunt of it.
In the wall in the hotel room?
Well, no, then I punched a hole in the wall in the hotel room.
Yeah.
So, anyway, enough of the Rick Clunn's imperfections. But this is just, again, a picture of the, of the area I was fishing, Browns Creek and Lake Guntersville, and that little tiny piece of grass was out here, and all my other fish came from this little tiny bridge under this side creek here, back in the back of Guntersville.
Point at the other arrow again. That's where the grass was.
That's where the isolated grass was that these big ones were living around.
And then the bridge is there.
And then the bridge back here is, like I said, real shallow area, 4 to 5 foot leading to the bridge, dropping about 8, 9 under the bridge. And I'm sure that's one of the skyline graphics I have in my hand. And this is also one of the historical things about the Classic. I caught that 715, which when I caught it became the biggest bass ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic. Ricky Green here, the same day in the evening, caught an 8-something, which became the biggest bass ever caught in a Classic. Mine was second biggest. That record of the Classic held until about 6, 7 years ago at Toho Classic, maybe 8, 7 years ago at Toho Classic. That day, morning of the Toho Classic, I caught a 10-something, and I just went, I've got the biggest bass in the Bassmaster Classic. That same day, the guy that led the tournament, I got him, what's his name? He was from Florida, caught at 11-something off the bed. And so I still have the second biggest, and 11-something is now the first. Just trivia. But this, and that's Bo Dowden, the one that almost threw his rod in the lake when he heard the CB. Bo was one of my favorite human beings in the circuit. Nobody was like him. He's totally unique individual. And you see, he's fishing open face spinning reel, and he was catching them up and catching them good. I think he had a 10 fish limit every day. Yeah, he only did in one day, 29. So that might have been helping win the tournament. But I only had 26. I don't think nobody caught a limit every day.
Let's see what's it say? First day.
Says first day, Rick Clunn and Gary Wade had the biggest fish, 3 pounds 10 ounces. That was the one I caught. The 310 was the one I caught on the way out that evening of the first day.
Did it say how much your big bass bonus was?
And let's see, Gary Wade, we split $400. And then the second day, Ricky Green had an 8-pound 9-ouncer. He got 900. And I had 7-pound 13-ouncer was second biggest. And I got 400 to myself that day.
Right on.
Yeah, but this is the most important number. You know, first in 25,000. So,
So you won 25,000 for winning the classic.
yeah, 25 plus $950 more for the big fish. No, and see, that's, I think that we were launching in the storm as that first day we went out. You can see it doesn't look real pleasant. Oh yeah, here he's talking about the CBs and how they could, you know, report in every day what anglers had. And typical to me, I didn't want, I wanted less civilization on the water as possible, and that would just bring in more out there. And here's one of my first sponsor ads. And that's the big Indiana blade spinnerbait. It was a weed waiter, Fleck weed waiter. And my trophy,
Where's that trophy now?
it's in, I don't have it in the house. I used to have the 401 were all this same style, but now they're in the Bass Pro Shop Fishing Hall of Fame, Bass Fishing Hall of Fame in Springfield, Missouri. And they're, all four of them are in the display they have for me. All right. Okay, oh yeah, here's Saul. I just kind of wanted to point that out. It said the most startling report in the classic log came at 8:10 Thursday, the 1976 classic second day. This is boat number one. This is the writer going. This is boat number one. The correspondent said, we have 4 bass weighing approximately 20 pounds. Still amazes me myself. Like I said, never had another bite off that spot. So I got there, I hope, right at the perfect time. Must have. Well, this is what Bull Shows tournament. See, now we're still getting into the 1977 year, and so we're already having tournaments. And I actually drew Rick Garlow the final day, and I went with him. This is the other thing most people have forgotten in this era. We had to draw another pro. Okay, and then you had to flip the coin, decide whose boat you were going to take. If you couldn't agree on it, you had to flip a coin. And then you had to decide who gets what half of the day. You only got half a day. Nowadays, I'm so envious of these young anglers and the elites and stuff where they get the whole day. They don't have another fisherman interfering with their plan. You know, and back then, that was one of your worst fears, is that you were not going to get your half a day because the other fisherman ran you too far away and you had to go to his fish half the day. It was a rule. So, but I did draw him that final day, and I wasn't doing that well. So I went with him, and I learned a lot. Some of the best draws I had were the best anglers. You always feel, well, he's a good angler. He's going to want to take his boat. Yeah, he was, but he wasn't going to try to, you know, sandbag you or fool you or lie to you. You know, the ones that weren't so good, they did, because everybody, pride, whatever reason, they thought they had to have their own boat. I was one of them. I knew I had more confidence in my own boat. So I'd say about once I won the classic, it gained you a little more, you know, power you know, when you're trying to negotiate with these guys about taking your boat. They tended to believe you a little more because they started to see your results. But I still think, you know, 60% of the time I got to take my boat, 40% of the time I had to go with the other angler. Especially second and third day. If you didn't, that first day was so critical in those tournaments to have a good day. Because if you had a bad day, they dang sure didn't want to go with you. How Bass Pros ranked in 1976. Jimmy Houston won Angler of the Year. That's the one time I thought he was probably the most serious that I saw Jimmy Houston his whole career when it came to actual competition. He was always serious, but definitely he was at a different level this year. That's 1977, February. That changed my whole life. So I was actually 76, but this was the beginning of the change.